Throughout history, we've fought wars over land, religion, and resources. Noble causes, strategic interests, survival itself. You know, the big stuff that actually matters. But then, there are the other wars, the ones that make you wonder if our entire species lost its mind for a hot minute. Wars where people died over the most ridiculous, petty, absolutely insane reasons you could possibly imagine. These aren't just footnotes in dusty history books. These are real conflicts where real people grabbed weapons and marched to their deaths because someone got offended over, well, you'll see. By the end of this, you'll question everything you thought you knew about human logic. Let's dive into some of history's most embarrassing moments. Medieval madness. Let's start with what might be the most Italian conflict ever fought. Picture medieval Italy. Not the romantic Renaissance version, but the chaotic mess of city-states constantly at each other's throats. Bologna and Modena were neighbors who couldn't stand each other. Think of them as that pair of neighbors who argue over everything from property lines to whose dog is barking too loud. In 1325, some soldiers from Modena decided to raid Bologna. Their target? Not the treasury, not the armory, not even the local brothel. They stole a wooden bucket from a well in the town center. A bucket, used for drawing water, probably worth about as much as a decent sandwich. Bologna lost its collective mind. You'd think someone had kidnapped the Pope's mother. The city demanded the bucket back immediately. Modena's response? Come and take it. And Bologna said, fine, we will. What followed was a full-scale medieval war. Not a skirmish, not a heated argument with swords. An actual war with armies, sieges, and battle formations. Both cities called in their allies. The Guelphs backed Bologna, the Ghibellines supported Modena. Suddenly, half of northern Italy was picking sides in the Great Bucket conflict of 1325. The decisive battle happened at Zappolino. Thousands of armored knights charged at each other screaming war cries over kitchen equipment. When the dust settled, over 2,000 people were dead. 2,000 human beings died because someone took a bucket that probably cost less than a decent bottle of wine. Modena won, by the way. They kept the bucket. In fact, they were so proud of their victory that they hung it in their cathedral tower where you can still see it today. 700 years later, tourists pay money to look at the bucket that caused a war. Big shout out to subscriber S, Tyrion 2F, for suggesting this absolute masterpiece of human stupidity. And speaking of supporting the channel, our membership club is now open. Join to get exclusive emojis, members-only videos, priority responses to your comments, and help us create more content like this, because apparently history is full of stories this ridiculous. Bacon gone wrong. Fast forward to 1859, and we find ourselves on San Juan Island, a tiny piece of land floating between what's now Washington State and British Columbia. The island was basically a geographical middle finger. Nobody was quite sure if it belonged to America or Britain. Both countries had citizens living there, farming potatoes, and trying to mind their own business. Enter Lyman Cutler, an American farmer who just wanted to grow his crops in peace. Every morning, he'd wake up and tend to his potato patch like any reasonable person. But there was one problem. A massive black boar owned by Charles Griffin, an Irish employee of the British Hudson's Bay Company. This pig had zero respect for international boundaries. Every day, it would waddle over to Cutler's farm and feast on his potatoes like it owned the place. Cutler complained to Griffin repeatedly, "Control your pig." Griffin's response was basically, deal with it. On June 15, 1859, Cutler had enough. He walked outside to find the pig destroying his potato crop again. So he grabbed his rifle and shot the pig dead. One bullet, one dead pig. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Griffin demanded compensation, $100 for his pig. In 1859 money, that's like asking for $3,000 today. For a pig that had been stealing potatoes. Cutler offered $10. Griffin threatened to have him arrested by British authorities. This is where things went completely insane. Cutler ran to the American authorities and demanded protection. The Americans sent soldiers. The British saw American soldiers and sent their own troops. Soon, both sides were staring at each other across this tiny island, armed to the teeth. The escalation was breathtaking. Britain deployed 3 warships with 167 guns. America responded with 461 soldiers and 14 cannons. 2 of the world's most powerful military forces were now facing off over a dead pig that had been eating potatoes. For months, they maintained this ridiculous standoff. Soldiers on both sides knew exactly how absurd the situation was, but nobody wanted to back down first. The tension was real. One nervous trigger finger could have started a war between Britain and America. Finally, cooler heads prevailed. Both governments realized they were about to fight a war over pork and quietly began withdrawing troops. The only casualty of the entire pig war was one very unlucky boar who just wanted some free potatoes. The Americans got the island in the end, but it took 12 years of arbitration to settle the dispute. 12 years of diplomatic paperwork because a farmer couldn't share his vegetables with a hungry pig. Australia's humiliation. Now we need to talk about the time an entire country declared war on birds and lost. This isn't a metaphor or some clever historical analogy. The Australian government literally sent soldiers with machine guns to fight emus, and the emus won. It's 1932, and Australia is dealing with the Great Depression like everyone else. To help struggling farmers, the government had encouraged wheat cultivation in Western Australia. The plan was simple: clear land, plant wheat, make money. What they didn't account for was that they'd built these farms right in the middle of emu migration routes. Emus are basically 6-foot-tall feathered tanks with attitude problems. They're flightless birds that run at 30 miles per hour and have zero fear of humans. When migration season came, roughly 20,000 emus decided the wheat fields looked like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The farmers watched in horror as thousands of these feathered dinosaurs demolished their crops. They begged the government for help. The government's solution? Send in the army, because surely a few soldiers with military-grade weapons could handle some overgrown chickens. Major G.P.W. Meredith was put in charge of Operation Emu Extermination. He arrived with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. This was going to be a massacre, just not the kind they expected. The first battle was a disaster. The emus scattered in all directions when the shooting started. These birds were apparently smarter than the military strategists. They'd learned to split into small groups, making the machine guns useless. When the soldiers tried to chase them, the emus just ran away. Have you ever tried to shoot a moving target that's 6 feet tall and running 30 miles per hour in zigzag patterns? The soldiers hadn't either. After 6 days of combat, the army had killed exactly 986 emus out of 20,000. They'd used up most of their ammunition shooting at empty air. The emus, meanwhile, were still eating wheat and probably laughing in whatever sound emus make when they're amused. Major Meredith's official report was a masterpiece of military humiliation. He admitted that the emus had superior tactics, better mobility, and what he called guerrilla warfare strategies. He was essentially saying that birds had outsmarted the Australian army. The government pulled the troops out in disgrace. The farmers were left to deal with the emus using traditional methods like fencing and poison. The emus continued their wheat-eating rampage for years. The best part? The emus became folk heroes. Newspapers around the world mocked Australia for losing a war to birds. The emus didn't just win. They became international celebrities for humiliating one of the world's military forces. To this day, no country has officially declared war on animals again. The emu war stands as a reminder that sometimes nature doesn't care about your machine guns, your military training, or your national pride. Sometimes the birds just win. The ultimate grudge. Some people hold grudges for weeks, maybe months. Captain Robert Jenkins held his for 7 years. And when he finally got his revenge, it started a war that killed thousands of people, all because he really wanted everyone to see his severed ear. Back in 1731, Jenkins was sailing his merchant ship through Caribbean waters when Spanish coast guards boarded his vessel. Spain controlled most of the Caribbean and didn't appreciate British traders cutting into their business. The Spanish captain, Juan de Leon Fandino, decided to send a message. He tied Jenkins to the mast and cut off his left ear with a cutlass. Then, in what might be history's most sadistic parting gift, he handed the bloody ear back to Jenkins and told him to show it to his king. Tell your king that if he were here, I would do the same to him. Most people would probably throw away their severed body part and try to forget the whole traumatic experience, not Jenkins. This man carefully preserved his ear and carried it around in a jar for 7 years. 7 years of looking at his own decomposing ear every day, waiting for the perfect moment to use it as a political weapon. That moment came in 1738. Britain and Spain were already having trade disputes, and Parliament was looking for an excuse to get aggressive. Jenkins walked into the House of Commons, pulled out his jar, and dramatically displayed his pickled ear to the assembled politicians. The effect was electric. Here was a British citizen holding physical evidence of Spanish brutality. Never mind that this had happened 7 years ago. Never mind that Jenkins had probably been smuggling when he got caught. The ear was right there, looking gross and tragic in its little jar. Parliament erupted in outrage. How dare Spain mutilate a British subject? This was an insult to the crown. War was declared almost immediately, not because of trade routes, not because of territorial disputes, but because a guy with exceptional commitment to revenge had kept his ear in a jar long enough to cause maximum political drama. The War of Jenkins' Ear lasted 9 years and spread across 3 continents. British and Spanish forces fought in the Caribbean, Georgia, and even the Philippines. Thousands of soldiers and sailors died in battles from Cartagena to St. Augustine. The irony is incredible. Jenkins probably saved more lives by losing his ear than most heroes save by keeping theirs. If he'd just thrown the thing overboard and moved on with his life, none of those people would have died. Instead, his commitment to the long game turned a bar fight into an international conflict. The war eventually merged into the larger War of Austrian Succession because apparently Europe couldn't have just one war at a time. But it all started with one man's refusal to let go of the past, literally. Jenkins became a minor celebrity, though history doesn't record what happened to the famous ear. Presumably, it finally got the burial it deserved after starting one of the most petty wars in human history. Love and citrus. Our final stop takes us to 1801, where Napoleon Bonaparte had decided that Britain needed to be economically strangled. His continental system was supposed to cut off British trade with Europe. Every country had to join the blockade or face the consequences. Most nations fell in line quickly, except Portugal. Portugal had a problem. They'd been Britain's oldest ally for centuries, and their economy depended heavily on British trade. Joining Napoleon's blockade would be economic suicide, so they politely declined to participate in the French emperor's economic warfare. Napoleon was not a man who accepted no gracefully. He turned to Spain and basically said, "Your neighbors are being difficult. Fix this." Spain, already under French influence, had little choice but to invade Portugal and force them into compliance. This is where our story gets romantic in the most inappropriate way possible. The Spanish commander, Manuel de Godoy, was leading an army into Portugal to destroy lives and conquer territory. But he was also deeply in love with Queen Maria Luisa of Spain, and he wanted to impress his royal mistress with his military prowess. So as Spanish troops marched through Portuguese towns, burning and looting, Godoy made sure to collect oranges from the conquered territories. Not gold, not strategic supplies, oranges. He carefully packaged the freshest, most beautiful citrus fruits he could find and sent them back to Madrid as romantic gifts for the queen. The symbolism was grotesque. While Portuguese families fled their homes and soldiers died in skirmishes, Godoy was essentially sending love letters made of fruit. Here, my darling, have some oranges I picked while destroying this peaceful country for Napoleon's ego. The invasion itself was absurdly successful. Portugal's military was no match for Spanish forces, and most towns surrendered without much of a fight. The Portuguese government quickly agreed to close their ports to British ships and join the continental system. Mission accomplished in just 2 weeks, but the orange sending continued throughout the brief campaign. Godoy treated the entire invasion like a romantic adventure, collecting citrus souvenirs while people's lives were destroyed around him. He was basically a tourist with an army, taking selfies at historical monuments while the monuments were still burning. The war got its name because those oranges became the most memorable part of the entire conflict. Not the strategic implications, not the thousands of displaced civilians, not even Napoleon's expanding influence. History remembered the fruit. Portugal's submission to the continental system was temporary anyway. Within a few years, they were back to trading with Britain, and Napoleon's economic blockade eventually collapsed. The War of the Oranges achieved nothing lasting except giving Godoy a chance to flirt with his queen through military conquest. The whole episode perfectly captures the absurdity of early 19th century European politics. Empires rose and fell, countries were invaded and occupied, and thousands of people suffered. All so that powerful men could play out their personal dramas on a continental stage. At least this time, someone got free fruit out of the deal. So there you have it, 5 wars that prove humans will fight over literally anything. Buckets, pigs, birds, body parts, and fruit. Thousands of people died because someone couldn't share potatoes, someone else couldn't let go of an ear, and a general thought oranges were romantic. If this made you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, hit that subscribe button and join our members club for more stories that'll make you lose faith in our species. Because, honestly, we're all just one stolen bucket away from total chaos, and maybe that's exactly what makes us human.